afternoon. This is Carl Buell with Navigate Business Sales and Acquisitions. It's 1 minute after, and that's our time to start. So we'll go ahead. We do have some additional people signing in to the audio portion of the conference, but let's go ahead. First of all, we appreciate you joining us today. We know your time is valuable, and thank you very much for joining in with us. We'll try to make this informative and concise. This is what we call a Navigate Webit. A Webit offers cool content fast. Our goal is to get you in and out in 30 minutes and on your way, except for any Q&A that might continue a little bit longer. And our cool Webit mascot is the copyright of Navigate. So some general information to start out here before we begin. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you would like to ask any questions at any time during the event, you may type it into the Q&A box on your control panel on the right side of your screen. Be sure to click the send button to submit your question. We will open the session for discussion and questions at the end of the event, and I think we have, with the number of people on here, we can allow people to speak over the phone as well. I have Linda Smith, who is our business manager, who is on the webcast with us. She is monitoring questions as we go along to make sure that we don't miss anything. If you would like to speak as we're opening it up for questions, you can use the raise hand indicator. And if you want to do that, just simply click raise your hand. If you want to withdraw your question, you can remove that. We're also recording today's event, and so your participation in the event represents your acknowledgement of the fact that we are recording and your agreement to participate. So with that, let me introduce myself. My name is Carl Buell. I am formerly a Fortune 50 executive management person and entrepreneur. I'm the owner and managing member of Navigate Business Sales and Acquisitions. My first part of my career was an advertising executive. I am a second-generation madman. We'll talk about that a little bit today about madmen. I worked in Chicago with Fortune 500 companies such as General Mills, Pillsbury, Wrigley, and McDonald's and others. I'm also a former Microsoft exec, where I managed business development, international marketing, and government affairs for them back in the 90s when it was very exciting. So I'd like to just spend one slide here talking a little bit about Navigate. We talk about and position ourselves as M&A leaders, leading in the M&A field with emerging companies, which we define as companies above Main Street and below lower middle market or below the investment banks. So the boutique investment banks work in the middle market, in the lower middle market area. The business brokers focus primarily on Main Street businesses, and Navigate is right in the middle there, focusing on what we call entrepreneurial developing companies. Let's talk about our agenda today. We are going to talk about the 10 essential steps to sell your company. So obviously we will cover those. We're going to discuss a little bit which financial reports need to be presented and why. We'll talk about alternative approaches to valuation, or do you make them guess the offer price? We're going to divulge Navigate's secret step number 5 that our competitors don't talk about. We're going to speak about shopping the financing, which is a critical part of the step, and then Navigate's secret step number 9 that our competitors don't know about. So let's go ahead here. First of all, step number 1 is obviously financial reports. That's really where it begins. And so the key question there is which financial reports and why. So 3 years of tax returns are critical. Tax returns, why? Because it's based on the assumption that no one reports more income to the government than necessary. So if it looks good to the government, it should look good to a buyer. We like to see 3 years because we want to take a look at what the trend is. And we like to look at P&Ls to match. Now, why would we want P&Ls in addition to the 3 years of tax returns? Because what we want to be able to do is compare the two. You can take a tax return and reverse engineer the P&L. So we want to look at these two for the same time period to see if they're compatible, to see if there are any discrepancies. So we like to look at both of those. Obviously, we like to look at a year-to-date P&L statement, which is dated for a particular time. And we also like to look at 3 years of balance sheet. Now, balance sheets are a snapshot, so why would we want to look at a trend of the balance sheet? First of all, with the balance sheet, we're looking at how much debt the company has. And why do we look at 3 years? We want to analyze equity trends for the company. Is the company adding equity to their bottom line, or are they adding debt? It's interesting that we'll find a lot of entrepreneurs who take distributions on the business, and that's only natural. But distributions accrue to the balance sheet, not to the P&L. So you could be an owner of a company and taking a lot of money out of the company and not realizing, because you're not really conversant with financial statements, that you're actually taking money out of the company because the company's accruing more debt and borrowing to fund those distributions. So that's something that these are the financial measurements that we like to take a look at. And how long does this take to collect these financial statements? It's going to be anywhere from days, weeks, or months, depending on how organized the owner is, how organized you are, and how quickly you can assemble that information. So the next thing, step number 2 that we look at is valuation. And as I mentioned, we are going to talk about alternative approaches to valuation, and we actually did a separate webcast about this about a month ago or so, and that's available on our YouTube channel, which I'll be talking about at the end of the presentation here. We'll give you some contact information. But there are basically 4 approaches to valuation. The first is accredited appraisers. Now, the advantage of an accredited appraiser is you've got someone who's certified in doing valuations and appraisals. He or she uses multiple valuation methods, and documentation is something that you'll receive as a result of that. It's certainly an arm's length transaction, which you're going to need if you're going to get the deal financed, and usually it's going to hold up in court, as they are expert witnesses oftentimes brought in to substantiate the valuation of a company when there's a dispute. So the second source of valuation is a business intermediary. Well, let me talk a little bit actually about the disadvantages of an accredited appraiser here. The disadvantage is that it's going to take a long time, perhaps 6 to 8 weeks. The cost will be high, minimum probably $5,000 to $10,000. And the other question there, is that overkill for what you need? So the second source of valuation is a business intermediary. The advantages there are intermediaries have large databases of market comps that they can use. The other approach that they take here, and the other benefit, is that it's adaptable and flexible to the market. So what do I mean by that? The point is that if there are changes in the marketplace, somebody that you're working with locally as a business intermediary can make adjustments to that. The disadvantage is there can be significant variability in the math and inconsistency in the results, and it may not be an arm's length transaction if the intermediary has a commission that is based on a success fee of selling your company. Excuse me. The do it online approach is something that has emerged over the recent years. There are websites available now that allow people to go in and do their own valuation. The benefit there is it's a fraction of the cost. It's much faster than an accredited appraiser. And it's arm's length transaction, kind of. But the unknown there is who are the people who are doing this, and what is their experience level? Are they certified? Are they not certified? And the disadvantages include the fact that it's fairly impersonal. You fill out a form online, and the valuation is delivered FedEx. It's also that source is likely not accepted by a bank, so that's something that you need to be aware of if you're trying to get the deal financed. And the final is the do-it-yourself valuation, where you actually may get lucky if you guess within the ballpark, but the disadvantages are that without the market comps and the tested algorithms and no documentation, it's likely not to be very accurate. Valuation can take days, weeks, or months, depending on which source you choose. The third step is targeting. So after you speak to your customers, your competitors, your vendors, you need to step back and now define who is the acquirer. Who are you going to sell this company to? And when we do this, we look at it in a couple of ways. The first way is we ask the question, is this going to be a generic sale or is it going to be a strategic sale? We define a generic sale as selling to another owner-operator. In other words, someone who is going to operate the business perhaps similar to how it's being operated today, or a strategic sale, a company that's willing to pay a higher multiple because the company that's being sold has one or more of the following features. They have significant market penetration in a strategic and growing niche market. They have unique know-how or proprietary technology or registered intellectual property, such as patents and trademarks, or an insanely profitable company. Those are criteria for a strategic sale. The targeting can be done in a matter of days and weeks. That takes us to the fourth section, which is developing the offering. And again, if it's a generic sale, we'll develop a 15 to 30 page summary that summarizes the financials, the customers, the competition, the risks, the buyer benefit, high-level information that gives us a profile of the company. If it's a strategic sale, we're probably going to be developing a 50 to 100-page offering memorandum. Now, here you want to go into very, very significant detail, as much detail as possible to provide very, very in-depth information. This is likely to take months more than weeks, but if you're organized and all the information is at your fingertips, you can probably get it done in weeks as opposed to months. Step number 5 is Navigate's secret step, which is step number 5, and that's the due diligence package. So the due diligence package in and of itself is certainly no secret. But the point here is while the prospectus or offering memorandum represents the sales material, the due diligence package provides all of the detail behind it. It's going to provide your business plan. It's going to provide your asset list, your lease information, cash flow statements, payroll reports, operations manuals, receipts, bank statements. In other words, it's all of the information that a potential buyer is going to ask for when they start to get into the due diligence. So what is our secret? Our secret is you prepare this in advance of starting to the marketplace. So before you start marketing, before you have a prospect on the line, in other words, when somebody is interested in the company, you don't start collecting information after you have an engaged prospect. You start this process very early and very much in advance. And the trick here is it's going to take weeks or months. So you can see the preparation here is very time-consuming and very detailed, and we recommend starting that preparation very early in the process. Number 6 is marketing, and marketing splits really into two ways. There's the conventional marketing of the Mad Men, great show if you haven't seen it, on HBO, Traditional marketing includes advertising, telemarketing, direct mail. But today, all of the marketing is digital and social media. And here are a dozen websites for matching buyer with seller online. There are dozens more, and different marketing websites are more effective for different types of businesses. It's not the particular website that's important here, but again, it's the preparation. And when you go to market, you have to identify what your message strategy is in terms of the headline, the copy, how you're going to position the company to attract buyers in. And you have to think about what your response path is going to be. In addition to the digital marketing, we have the overlay now on top of that of social media. And as we all know, this is a huge way that the market is communicating, not only in business, but obviously personally, but these are now key tools that allow you to market a business. The marketing step, no matter what approach you take, whether it's analog or whether it's digital, is probably a month-long or many months-long process. And as you begin the marketing process, what happens is you're going to get into prospect management. So prospect management, one of the first things you'll need to think about as an owner, as a seller is you need some confidential mode of communication. What I mean by that is when the calls start coming in, are you taking them on your cell phone? Do you have a confidant at the company who is taking those calls and understands what's going on? You have to think through your communication mode and how that's going to work. You start obviously with the first calls, the first contact. That is going to be perhaps one or more calls, and during those initial calls you need to qualify the prospect. The way to do that is obviously talk about their background, their experience, and at some point we're going to want to ask that person for financial statement to make sure that their financials match what they say that they can do in terms of acquiring the company. Then you want to make sure they sign a confidentiality agreement. So you're going to want to talk to your legal counsel and make sure that you have an agreement that not only binds them in terms of confidentiality, but likely in terms of a non-compete. It is not unknown to us that people come in, look at companies, try to reverse engineer the proprietary information. So you have to be very careful at this stage. That leads to a first meeting, and then you have to decide, am I going to do this during business hours so that they can see all the activity, or am I going to do this after hours for confidentiality, but no one's there and I'm marching somebody around in the dark? These are all things that are critical in terms of how the company gets positioned. And then you have to screen the tire kickers. We also have some information about that on a recent webcast that we did. The entire prospect response management cycle is going to take months. So this is an ongoing process that's going to take a long time. Now, you have to remember the key point of the prospect management phase, which is number 7, is to get to a term sheet, to get to a letter of intent, or to get to a purchase agreement. These are somewhat sequential from top to bottom in terms of their depth and detail. We consider a term sheet to be something that is a very high level, defines the initial terms of how the deal would come together and what the structure is, but it's a non-binding document. The letter of intent is similar, but you can put provisions in there that become more binding, but it's less onerous or less specific than the final purchase agreement. Whether you start with the term sheet or letter of intent, you want to specify that within X number of days or weeks, it will lead to a formal purchase agreement based on the terms outlined in the term sheet or the letter of intent. This is a many months, one or more months type of process in terms of timing. Now we get into financing. So the term sheet, the letter of intent, the purchase agreement should outline how the deal will be financed based on the buyer's abilities and preferences. So you're going to look at how are we going to structure this financing? Is it going to be a conventional loan? Are we going to do an SBA loan? SBA loans have the advantage of offering a guarantee, but the guarantee is to the bank, not to the borrower. So in the event of default by the borrower, the bank is protected. That does not absolve you or the borrower from paying back that loan. So it's just an incentive for the bank to make a loan. Seller note is always something we take a look at it. No seller wants to consider that. But in today's financing environment, we probably want to see some type of seller note. And if you do any kind of SBA, they're likely, very likely, to require that at least 10% of that financing be in the form of the seller note. Then we have mezzanine financing and also hard money. Hard money is private lending, and the word ouch is here because these are much higher interest rates than you're going to find with a bank loan or an SBA loan. So that's the structure and the source. Once you understand that, then you want to go to the phase which we call shopping the loan. So when you shop the loan, you want to find a source that can provide an SBA loan or a conventional loan. So where do you go? One thing to remember is that not all lending sources are equal. We can talk about that as an entire webinar, but the point is that some banks, some financial institutions are much better qualified in terms of helping you get it done. Some step back and have no sense of urgency. Others will roll up their sleeves, step in, and help you get it done. So it's important to understand that different banks offer different services in this regard. You want to start with existing relationships and build on those if you have those. And now, because of all of the homework you've done, you've got a financial package, you've got an offering memo, you've got the due diligence package. Now you can provide a complete kit or a complete set of documents to the bank. And it's probably best to even start this before you start the marketing to get people aware of the fact that you are thinking about selling and get them to understand this is what I'm looking at in terms of how we might finance the deal, so that when a buyer does come along, you're already down that road. This is very important to remember. Although you think you may have a deal because you have a signed purchase agreement, you don't actually have the deal until you have the financing. This is going to take 4 to 6 weeks to get a commitment letter from a financial institution at their minimum. So let's get into number 9 here. We've got about 6 minutes before we finish and open it up for questions. Step number 9 is Navigate's secret step number 9 that we said many of our competitors don't know about. We call this the project management phase. Project management is a discipline of planning, staffing, organizing, directing, and managing resources, in this case, to remove the specific legal and financial conditions that need to be settled or removed before you can get to a closing. Now, the trick here is to overlay project management discipline when you have no direct control. What we recommend, and one thing that we do, is exactly what's shown in this document. Or not the document, but the background screen here. We'll actually create a schematic of who the players are and how they connect with each other, so we understand who the decision makers are, who the influencers are. Once we have all of that, we will then schedule a weekly status call to understand where have we been, where are we going now, and what do we need to accomplish in order to get these criteria solved. This project management phase can actually shave weeks and months off of a project if you handle it as a project management issue. This is going to take maybe 4 to 6 weeks to get going, but it can actually take months as you're trying to remove these conditions. Now we get to the closing, and at this point, we recommend using an attorney who's very experienced in business transactions. Do not use your local family attorney or general counsel. It's very important you use someone who understands transactions and business closings. We strongly recommend a neutral party. Oftentimes we'll have a buyer or seller say, I really want to use my guy or my gal for the closing. It's much easier when you have a neutral party if you get some last-minute snags there. But when you reach this point, and by now, the closing should be a formality. So you've done a lot of the prep work up front. You've done a lot of the homework in terms of getting all of these documents done. You've gone through we've gone through very quickly here the marketing phase, the prospecting phase, the prospect management phase, the financing phase. So by the time you get here, it should all come together fairly quickly. It will take your closing attorney approximately 4 weeks to assemble all of the final information in order to prepare for the final closing. So before I open it up for Q&A, wanted to say and remind everyone that all participants will receive our free guide, Selling a Business Preparedness Evaluation Guide. We'll be sending that out after the webcast. And we'd also like to send you a quick survey that's going to come to you via SurveyMonkey, which is an online survey tool, I guess is the best way to say it. And for all of those who complete the survey, we will give you a copy of the PowerPoint. So we would appreciate your feedback on how we do this. So now at this stage, we're at 1:28. We finished on time. These are various ways to reach us and communicate with us. And now I'm going to, Linda, unmute you here to let you know that if we have any questions, this will be a good time to open it up for questions.
Carl, we did have one question from Mark. What is mezzanine financing?
Okay, we often hear, or in more complex and larger deals, about mezzanine financing, and that's something we're only going to see in a larger deal. We're not going to see it in a smaller deal. But mezzanine financing is either, it's what the term implies. It's debt that sort of sits in between in terms of equity. So it's subordinated debt, or it can be preferred equity, and it's always a claim on the company's assets. But what makes it mezzanine, and thus the term, is that the mezzanine financing is senior to common shares of stock, not preferred, but it's senior to the common shares. It can be structured as debt, as unsecured or subordinated, and it can be in the form of a note or preferred stock. Any other questions?
Carl, there was one other question. So what is the total amount of time that it might take to sell a business going through these steps?
Good question. And there is no right answer or final answer. Well, let's go to our board here, and we can talk about that. The fastest we have ever done it has been 2 months from start to finish, and we got very lucky in doing that. It was a good company, it was a profitable company. We had a buyer come along, and we fit perfectly into that. More typically, I would say your average deal is going to be around the 9-month time frame, plus or minus. And then larger deals are going to be in the 12 to 18 month plus range. Larger deals being $10, $20 million deals with more complex issues related to them. And of course, it can even go greater than this. But those are the general breakdowns. I wouldn't expect this. 9 to 12 is probably more typical. A lot of this depends on the financing, and on the high side, we can go up this far. Any other questions?
Carl, we have another question. Can you help me understand why the seller needs financing?
Why the seller needs financing? I understand the question. And I guess maybe that was a point of confusion. What we're saying in the financing stage is if you are a seller, and let's go back to our financing window here. Hold on, where is that? Okay. Here we go, back here. What we're saying is you as a seller need to think about the financing and get involved in helping the buyer with the financing if you want the deal to go smoothly. If you simply throw up your hands and say, that's his problem, that's her problem, I have nothing to do with that, in today's complex environment, the probability of doing the deal is going to go down. So we're not saying the seller needs financing, and I should have clarified that, but we are saying the seller should think about it, how it's going to be structured, and certainly offer to the buyer to help facilitate that process. I hope that answers the question.
Carl, we have one more question. How early in the process do you involve an attorney? Aren't they typically involved in document drafting prior to closing?
Boy, that is a great question. Let's take a look at this slide, which is, we have two slides here of sell-side sequence and timing. Actually, we'll go here. This is the first one. This is steps 1 through 5. So we're looking at providing the financials, valuation, targeting, through constructing the due diligence package. The reason that's such a great question is that your legal counsel can be a tremendous asset if he or she is a facilitator aligned with your goals to help you get the project done. Your legal counsel can be a tremendous detriment if he or she is not aligned with your goals. And the reason I say that is we often see people in the buy sequence here working with either two types of attorneys. One, an attorney who wants to get it done, and two, and I'm sorry to say this, we have any legal counsel on the phone, but oftentimes we see attorneys who will get involved and raise objections to string out the billing. The supreme example of that is a deal we closed about a year ago where we had an attorney involved with the buyer. 3 weeks later, we had essentially the exact same deal on the table, and the cost was additional $20,000 to the buyer. Was he or she protected to their best degree? I don't know. The issue is you have to balance risk. Risk is like the old teeter-totters that we used to play on. You can never reduce risk to zero. You can mitigate risk, you can analyze it, but you cannot reduce it to zero. So that's why we suggest very strongly that you use someone who is experienced in business transactions. To answer your specific question, how early do I get that person involved? We would say you want to get that person involved absolutely as soon as possible, starting at the beginning stage here. Bob, I'm thinking about selling my company. Susan, I'm thinking about selling my company. The key point that you need to remember is you are the client. Your attorney is not in control. Your attorney is going to provide you with recommendations and advice based on the law, based on reducing risk, and based on helping you achieve your objectives. you need to make the final decision. And if you feel that you have or are working with someone who is throwing up more roadblocks than helping you get to the final goal, and that's a question you need to raise with him or her and sit down and have that conversation. Again, you cannot reduce risk to zero, but we highly recommend, and every good business intermediary will recommend, you have to have a team to get this done. You cannot get this done on your own. You need legal counsel. You may need multiple specialties in or with legal counsel. You need to have your accountant or CPA fundamentally involved. You should have your financial planner involved if you've got someone like that working with you. You need to have that entire team engaged, and they need to be engaged as early as possible. Just remember, you make the final decision. So that's a lot of opinion as opposed to fact, but I guess it's based on some fact, based certainly on our experience. Your mileage may vary.
Yeah.
Linda, any other questions?
That was the last
question. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. 7 minutes of questions. Everybody hung in there. Thank you very much. We appreciate your interest in participation. We do these webcasts about buying. We have a buyer series, we have a selling series, and we have a growth and investment series where we talk about strategic investors and private equity coming into an entrepreneurial developing company to help them grow. If you feel like you're at a stage where it's too early to sell, but you feel like you need some help with some strategic growth. So we'll keep you informed about those in the future. We'll be sending out the things that we promised. And thank you very much for tuning in with Navigate. We know your day is valuable. Thank you again. Have a great day, and goodbye.